Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, as the case may be. I'd like to, first of all, welcome you to Anthropology 394 for the beginning of 2019. Happy New Year, in which we will be discussing great debates in human evolution. So this is just going to be a short introductory lecture, hopefully about 10 minutes long, just to go over some course logistics and some advice that I think is important for you guys to understand while you're taking this class. So first things first, I'd like for you to read over your syllabus. So you can hit pause on the video to do this if you need to. I can wait. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to read over the syllabus. It is important in a class like this to read the syllabus pretty closely so that you don't miss requirements or get confused about what we're doing, but hopefully I can clear up some of any potential points of confusion today. So this course is comprised of discrete units or capsules, as you may have noticed by looking at the schedule, and they're largely self-contained. So we're going to be doing a topic during each capsule, which is 2 weeks long. So during the first week of each capsule, what we're going to be doing is reading and discussing the materials that are relevant to a background understanding of each question. So that will be the first week. I will post a set of background readings and expect you to read them over the course of that week, not a terribly onerous list, something that you can complete within that week. And we will be discussing those in online forums during the course of the first week. And then during the second week, we will build on that learning and go into some more depth, reading more controversial or complex papers in each topic. So, for example, in the first week of our Naming New Species unit, we're going to start by learning about species concepts, the kinds of criteria that are used to recognize species in nature. You know, if you're one of those lucky beetle biologists who goes out there and gets to name new species all the time because there's so many different kinds of beetles, you know, what procedures do you go through in order to do this? So we're going to be learning also about standard modern taxonomic procedures. So what do biologists do when they're announcing new species? What do we consider species to be? Really basic kind of stuff. And then during the second week, we'll read about things like recently named hominin species like Homo naledi, for example, some of you may be familiar with from the Rising Star Cave in South Africa, and the currently ongoing arguments over whether it should be considered a distinct species or not, you know, whether it's placed in the correct genus or not. Should it be considered Homo? Should it be considered Australopithecus? Should it be a different genus, etc.? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start out with a basic understanding, and then we're going to move on to a more in-depth understanding of each topic. So our format is going to be a bit different this term than in previous online terms if you've taken classes with me, at least in some of them. So what I'm going to be doing is posting an introductory lecture during the first week of each capsule that outlines the basics of the topic and gives you some guidelines for study. And so for these lectures, you'll be seeing slides, not my big, huge face, but you are not required to log in at the time of each lecture. So, you know, if you're kind of freaking out over, I'm not available on Tuesday mornings, that's okay. You don't have to actually be there. In my experience, most students can't log on at the time of the lecture. You can view recordings of the lecture at any time, although I encourage you to view them earlier in the week rather than later so that they can help guide your study. But the majority of our interactions are actually going to be through online forums, not through me talking at you and showing slides. So I'd like to think of the forums as sort of an open seminar room where I, along with input from your classmates, can help guide your study. So we're going to be dynamically discussing each topic online throughout the week. And obviously you'll get the most out of these discussions if you do them a certain way, you know, if you kind of start participating sooner rather than later, et cetera, et cetera. The discussions themselves are not required except to the extent that you will be required to post one deep thought for each discussion for each week online, as outlined in your syllabus, but otherwise it's really for your own personal benefit. The more participation you engage in, the more likely you are to understand the unit as well as to do well in the class. So it will help me to get to know you if you all make sure that you have some sort of distinctive profile photo or avatar on the online forums. It might be kind of hard with the format that we're using, but if you participate regularly and I can sort of recognize you, then that will help. So in terms of the lectures right now, except for the very beginning of the term when we have one each week, including this lecture, I have lectures scheduled bi-weekly. So if you take a look at the schedule at the end of the syllabus, you'll see that there is basically an introductory lecture at the beginning of each capsule. But I will also schedule additional lectures if requested to do so during online discussions. So in other words, what this means is that if questions come up during the first week of readings and discussions that you as a group would like me to address in more detail, like if there's something about the background that's confusing, if it's confusing to many of you, if it's something that would be better discussed in a lecture than sort of through typewritten forum posts, then I will address these questions directly during extra lectures on the second week Tuesdays that we don't have any currently scheduled, if that makes sense. So each unit is 2 weeks long. During the first week on Tuesday, I have a lecture scheduled. There's no lecture scheduled for the second week of each Tuesday, but I will do an additional lecture if requested to do so. These won't happen, though, without active discussions during the first week of each capsule. So if you're not talking about anything and you don't have questions and there isn't anything that you want me to address, then I won't know what to talk about. Now, for those of you who find sitting in front of a computer or listening to online lectures somewhat tedious, then these additional lectures, just so you know, will likely be shorter and will definitely be more targeted than our regular lectures. So again, if you have questions, then I would encourage you to discuss those online and say like, hey, can you talk about this next week? I'm really confused about this. And then I can do that on those Tuesdays. So in this class, we have our major interactions through the biweekly lectures as well as the online discussions being the more important, really. And we'll have a combination of graded and ungraded activities. So the graded activities include things like your deep thoughts posts, which are required, the quizzes, which will occur biweekly at the end of the first week of each capsule, and also capsule worksheets that you'll complete one of for each capsule, as well as a final assignment that's due the same day that the final exam will be posted online. So the course format is a little bit asynchronous, as you'll notice by looking at the schedule. This allows for variety in your schedules, which is probably why many of you are taking an online class in the first place. So I'm sensitive to that. So for example, the lectures can be viewed at any time. The quizzes, you will have periods of at least 48 hours to take, so that if you're not home at a certain time while it's posted, you can take it another time, etc. Generally, I'm even more generous than 48 hours. So you will have a long time period during which you can take the quiz as long as you complete it during the required time after you start it. But ideally, you should be keeping track of the deadlines that are present in the schedule throughout the term. And you should also be working on your capsule worksheets throughout each unit, the 2 weeks of each unit. So you'll see at the top of the course spaces page, I've posted a capsule worksheet. So the worksheet itself is the same for every capsule. You're answering the same questions, although the answers will be different because the topics are different. And so you'll need a new one of these every 2 weeks. These are individual assignments, and you will be handing them in at the end of each capsule, and they'll be graded. So you will each need to complete one on your own. But I encourage you to work on and continue revising them throughout the 2 weeks that we devote to each topic, because if you do that, they'll serve as study guides to structure your learning. And it will be better if you think of them as kind of dynamic activities that you're working on throughout the 2 weeks rather than assignments that you need to make sure you have done by this specific deadline and then immediately hand them in so they can get checked off, if that makes sense. Without using them, I think you'll be making your life harder and studying for this class much, much harder. If you do use them, then it should be much clearer what you're getting out of each capsule topic. You are allowed to discuss them freely with each other during our online discussions. So if you have a question like, hey, I'm not really sure exactly what question is we should be addressing here, you can post that and discuss it with your classmates as well as with me, although each one of you needs to complete one of these capsule worksheets individually, and they are graded. So the capsule worksheets should be your primary study guide. The online forums are your primary interaction mode. And as I mentioned, there are asynchronous aspects of this class. In other words, not everything has to be done at a specific time. You don't have to watch the lectures at a specific time, but there are deadlines. I'm not going to go over all of them now because they're in the class schedule, but they do include assignment deadlines and quiz deadlines. So if you don't keep up with those, then that will be a problem for this class. So you should also check in on course spaces on a daily basis, ideally to keep up with this class, and make sure that you're subscribed to the announcements forum, which you should all be automatically subscribed to, but just in case, double check so that you get announcements that I post to the entire class by email. So if you've taken a look at the syllabus, then you'll note that 4 of our capsules are already chosen. These are women in prehistory, naming new species, determining sex and or gender in skeletal remains, however we define those things, and genomic ancestry testing. But the 5th topic that we'll be doing during the last capsule or last unit in the course remains open, and it's your choice as a class. So whatever you guys are interested in discussing within reason, we can do. So starting this week, using your input from your introductions, in other words, that burning question, if you've noted one that you'd like to have answered about human evolution, I'm going to be compiling a list of potential topics among which we will choose our 5th capsule no later, hopefully, than week 8. So hopefully by then we will know what we're talking about during the last couple of weeks of class so that I have time to locate some good readings, et cetera, et cetera. If you have readings that you'd like to explore yourself, then you are, of course, welcome to suggest those. So I would like to conclude by saying 2 things. First, you will get out of this course what you put into it. So I hope you all put a lot into it in terms of reading thoughtfully and coming up with questions and bringing them up to me and your classmates and discussing them, because this is a class about debates. And if we are going to be really engaging with the materials, then I expect to see some interesting debates online, which I can hopefully facilitate with the lectures that I'll be giving. Second, my overall goal in this class is to facilitate your scientific literacy, and this is the lens through which we'll be viewing everything in this class as we grapple with some very complex, difficult questions in human evolution. So this should be obvious from the capsule worksheets. When we're dealing with such difficult questions, it can make our intellectual activities a little bit easier if you think of them explicitly in terms of the scientific process. In other words, we may have a very complicated question that we'd like to know about our evolutionary past. For example, what was the role and or status of women in Paleolithic society? These are questions that are obviously very difficult to answer in any direct way. You know, we don't have a time machine. We can't go back and see exactly what society was like back then. But how can we formulate these questions in a scientifically rigorous way? How can we answer questions that are related to this hypothesis, even if we can't address the hypothesis of, say, women had X status in the Paleolithic? Maybe we can't address that directly because we don't have the time machine, but we can address related hypotheses based on the data that we have. You know, lithic materials and or Paleolithic art and or skeletal remains and or et cetera, et cetera. What sorts of questions can we address scientifically with those? And if we are going to address them in a rigorous way, according to the scientific method, how might we structure those inquiries? That's really how I would like you to be thinking throughout this entire class. So that's something to keep in mind. So anyway, I'm excited to have you all in class, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Don't forget to introduce yourself in the online forums this week and to start reading. I've given you a bunch of background information about the scientific method, which some of you may sort of roll your eyes and say, well, this is kind of old, or I've read this in one of your other classes before, but it's very important to understand these things in depth. So even if you think you know it all, it's not a bad thing to read them. And if you would like to, start asking questions about them online. I encourage you to ask questions in the online forums as well if you have questions about requirements or course logistics or anything like that. Some of your classmates may have the same questions, and that way I can answer them for all of you at the same time. If your question is super time sensitive or if it's personal, however, be sure to email me. So that all said, again, welcome to class, and I'm looking forward to it, and I hope to see you all online this week.